Welcome. This is my weekly summary of the work we've been doing on Twitch. Lately, we've been working on a personal finance tool called Fiume. The goal is to be able to manage money kind of in the medium to long term. So this past week, we spent about a session figuring out how to run unit tests without running our app. Okay, so we'll explain a little about that shortly. We did some refactoring to take two date specs that tended to travel together to a date range. We added the ability to delete people. We refactored money to amount, which is an enum that can grow to handle percents of another stream. So in US Social Security, there are situations where one spouse might get 50% of the other spouse's Social Security instead of the amount they would get on their own. Okay, so we want to support that notion. And we want to do this not breaking persistence. We already had a money amount for just saying this stream is worth this much per month, but now we have a more sophisticated model, but we don't want to break existing persistence. All right, now we have a couple of challenges, and I don't really have the right solution yet for sure. Mostly it comes down to the fact that we need global context sometimes. So if you have a stream with and you ask what's it worth at a particular time, so we calculate net worth, and you have to say, you know, for each of your income sources and expense sources, how much money is that worth at this moment? And unfortunately, you would think the answer would just be like, you know, what's the date, what's the money, and it's fine. But we also allow dates to depend on age, which means we need person, and actually we need people, which is the set of them. And the value can also depend on other streams in this last feature we're working on, still in progress, that lets you say, you know, half of another stream. Well, a stream by itself doesn't really have meaning. It has to be in a scenario. So we let you specify a set of scenarios, and then we generate each individual one. And in that context of an individual stream is the only time you can really assess that value. And so in either case, I need to get persons there or scenarios or, you know, potentially other things. And so solutions, well, we could put everything in globals and just say like, hey, an individual stream can go ask the global persons or people set, like, hey, tell me about this person and what their age is. Or we could pass them in, and that's kind of what we're doing now, but we end up passing stuff along the way. So stream is a fairly low level thing to ask about. I mean, a scenario has a bunch of streams and there are other relationships going on. And so by the time you pass things down, you know, you've passed through several levels, and that increases coupling too. So now these things that don't really care about person, say, have to know, keep the people array, you know, the people class, and pass that through because somebody down at the way low level might need it. So I don't know, that's what we're doing now. Another alternative would be to pass pointers to those collections, make like stream, give it a static reference to people. That wouldn't help scenario because scenarios are very dynamic, so it's only a partial solution, and it still creates kind of weird coupling. You can't just look at a bit of code and know. You've got to depend on what happened to it, you know, in other contexts. I don't know, other solutions, I'm open to hearing about it. What we kind of would like is Swift UI has this notion of an environment, and you can put something in the environment at the top level, and then intermediate level things don't reference that environment. They don't have to pass it around. It's just sitting there. And then at a low level, you can come in and say, hey, environment, I want to get access to person or people. And that would give you sort of the ability to get global context without passing global things around, and you still have some overall coupling, but at least most things don't depend on it, and syntactically it doesn't show up like the passing parameters does. I don't know the solution. we'll see. I'll show you an example as we get into the code. And then there's another challenge coming up. It's not really quite a challenge yet, but originally I designed things so that if you reuse a name, then fields can override. So I have, let's say, the name of a stream. I have my income stream. And if I decide, I say, let's say I'm making $1,000 a month on this income stream. And I originally just said I'm making $1,000 a month, but then later on I could come in and say, hey, I'm making $1,000 a month, but it stops when I turn age 67. And that last date would override the original, and we'd use kind of a merged version of this thing. And then in a scenario, I could make another change in that date. And again, everything in scenario one would use that third change or third value. What I think I would like to say is you can only have a name once. And again, this kind of raises this global context thing. I want to put this name in. Well, now how do I search to find out if it's only around once? Okay. But I'm thinking that would be the way to go, is not worry about overrides, but provide another way to set the timing on things like retirement and so on. Okay. But if I do that, I still want to be able to reuse a name in two different scenarios. So the one on the right, I've got name one, name two separate names, and then I use name three in both scenarios. That's okay. All their children can talk about name three. They don't interfere with each other. They mean totally different things. It almost doesn't matter that they're the same name, but it's fine. They don't interfere with each other. And so I'd like to allow that to stay okay. But, so the challenge of making sure name three is not used, I have to go scenario by scenario. And like in the scenario one on the right, name three, I'd look back in my parent context. Well, I don't have any name threes leading up to me. And then same thing on scenario two, name three, go back, no name threes. That's fine. But if I saw one, then it's a conflict. But it's hard for me to statically look at a name and say, is this thing right? Unless I work my way through the scenarios in some sense. I mean, it's not, well, I guess our trees go top down, so it's a little funny that way, but I could define a very impoverished navigation that goes through and make sure nobody's reusing names. But I don't know. Well, again, I've got to think on that. All right, let's take a look at a demo and look at some code. The first thing I mentioned was the performance work we did for unit tests. And what we did there was we took the model folder, which is what the unit tests are testing. We're not talking about UI tests, but just straight unit tests. And we put it in what Xcode calls a framework, which is a sort of bundle. I don't know, the words are all used. Modules, bundles, this is stats. But a framework is a group of classes and enums and whatever entities you have kind of in a separate package of some sort. And you can reference these. So I have the Fiume model, but if I go look at Fiume itself, it depends on the framework for the model. And then the tests also depend on the framework for the model. So it's kind of a separate package. So preparing that meant that we had to be very strict about when things were public or not. So if you leave the name out or the privacy qualifier out and just blank, it defaults to an internal access, which is fine within an app or within a framework. But when you go between the app and the framework, it's not okay. So anything down here in view, any tests that reference amount, they need to make sure it's public and not just the class, but any things you might access like constructors and functions and so on. You can have private functions that don't leak out. I mean, that's great, but you need to make sure all the true entry points are there. Okay, so our first step then was making these things properly public so they could be put in a framework, creating the framework, which is done here as a new target, and then making sure the links between them get set up. And then finally, if you want to reference stuff in a framework, well, it's in a separate package, entity, whatever you want to call it, and you need to do a separate import on it. So we had to modify the callers to include the import. All right, now what this gives me is, well, that gets me the framework of it, or the structure of it. It didn't help anything until we did a change in the project. It didn't change anything until we changed the way it launches. So here are my tests, and it's really the tests that launch differently. The main app is still the same, but originally it said Fiume. And what that says is when you run your tests, start up the application, which means bring up the initial views, any persistence that happens at that time, any other things that happen, bringing that up, and then running the tests inside the context of that app. Okay, so they, they're basically running, I don't know if it's a separate thread or not, but they're running in that app's main context. And what that implies is when you start your tests, it starts the simulator, and then it starts your application, and it doesn't do anything else with your application. It just has it there to run in, and then it takes the tests and runs them in that context. And so you're paying those 2 startup costs before you're running your own stuff. Now, what we've done with this is we set it to none, which is not available. Like, this is not available on the Mac. It's only a simulator, the iOS with the simulator, that can do it. You can't do it on the real device either. But what we can do is say host application none, and that says just start up the simulator, but don't start up the app. Just run it in some other context that's totally empty. And so there's no startup cost for your application at all. And so you speed it up, the runtime of the tests, by that amount. So for me, well, I think more than one thing is going wrong that had made it relatively slow, but let's see what happens here. So, yeah, so notice it's saying I got to build. And so I'm waiting for the build. Nothing I can do on the simulator side has anything to do with that. I don't know why I have to rebuild so much. My suspicion is that because I'm using the pre-release Swift testing, that maybe there's some cost to that. And I'm hoping that the new Xcode that's coming out sometime will deal with that. Okay, now it's ready to run the real thing. All right, so it's testing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Still a bit slow. 8, 9, 10. Okay, 10 seconds. All right, so let me run the tests. Now I'm paying the price of this build. That wasn't too bad. Okay, and so a few seconds, that's all right. Sometime. All right, so let's look at the date specifier. We said there was a situation with date specifier and turning that into a date range because we often have first and last traveling together. So date specifier, it really is 3 possibilities. Either it's an unchanged date, and that goes back to that overriding a name may say the date stays unchanged. It can be a month. We started this, I started my job in January 2020 sort of thing. Or it can be an age where we have the ID of the person and the int. I don't know if the name may be a better choice, but the way it is now, it's the ID. We take those 3 possibilities, and once, a stream starts on some date and ends on some date. It may not end, that's fine, and unchanged kind of covers that case. All right, now the date range, it holds the 2 fields. That's kind of the core job it has. And then the big function it has is includes. So what we do is when you are evaluating the net worth at a particular date, you want to go to a stream or a pool and say, hey, what's your value as of this date? And so we're trying to find out between the first date and the end date, what's the value? And if you're, if you're outside ranges, then, there's no, you're not, the value is going to be zero. Okay, so to decide if, what that value is, DateRange just doesn't do any evaluation. It just makes the decision, is this month year in range? Okay, so if it's unchanged, the first doesn't matter. It's an unbounded date on the left. And then if it's an unbounded date on the right, that's sort of like not specifying the dates. Everything's in that range. Okay, but if it's a month and the month they give us is less than the start month, then we're out of range. If it's an age, well, if we can't find the person, then it's out of range. But if the month is less than the start date, the birth date, then it's out of range. Okay, so you have to be greater than or equal to the start date in effect, and then if you pass through that, you're still going. Well, then you're possibly in range. We check on a month if you're out of range. If you're too big, you're out of range. You're past the end. Same thing for the birth date. If you're out of that, that's that. And then somewhere else, there's code that calls this and decides, if the thing is in range, give it the value that it deserves. And if it's not in range, give it a 0. All right, so that covered a fair bit of refactoring. And then finally, the last thing we've been working on, and it's not done yet, we originally, a stream just had a money amount. So a pool would say, I have $100,000 in savings. Like, okay, nice. That's just the amount of it. A stream might say, I'm earning $1,000 a month. That's how much the stream is worth. Okay, so to refactor this, originally our amounts were all just a money field. Now we've changed them over to where they're an amount field. And we started off with just this money case, got everything working with money just like it had before. And that's a fair bit of fallout from that. We wanted to keep this amount alive through most of the things being passed around because people need to use it. All right, and we're adding the case for a relative amount. So this would be like 0.5 of, and here I chose a string, but some name of some stream. Okay, so if I have Social Security at some rate, and I name it SS, and I say give me 0.5 of SS, 50% of SS, then this case covers that. And so you basically, this enum with the cases with fields in them, it gives you two separate data structures depending which situation you have. And it implicitly knows the type to know which enum it is. All right, and so we started work on value. I don't think we're done. Let me take this out before I forget. All right, but the simple case, if it's money and you ask how much it's worth, I tell you the amount that you told me the money had. So they have an amount with dot money of 100. Well, then it's 100. The relative one is trickier, and it turns out we need the scenario to know it. All right, so if you want the ratio, the value of this stream, well, you have to know which scenario that stream is in, okay? Because like I mentioned with the two separate trees, they could have the same name going up the tree as long as it's not in two places. And so this means we can only figure out an amount in the context of a scenario. Okay, so imagine two different Social Security scenarios. I get SS at age 62 or SS at age 67. They're both talking about SS, but another thing that references SS, 50% of SS, it's going to get two different values in two different scenarios. Even now, when somebody says, give me the value at a given month, I also want to know the scenario you're in. And if it's just a money, I don't need that. But with a relative rate, I do need it. So this is one of those global context things. I don't know. It's not quite global because a scenario is not a global object, but it's not something. It's something I only need in some circumstances. So it's kind of a conditional parameter, if I can say it that way. I don't. I don't. I don't know. I'm not totally happy, but I don't know what to do about it. All right, but at any rate, with the relative one, we got the ratio. Somewhere you're going to have the ratio times some other amount. All right, we look up this stream in the scenario. Okay, so that's why we need the scenario. All right, and you can also see I've got dates that are I'm allowing you to not pass values, and that's because we're in the middle of this extension and refactoring. I've got lots of places that don't pass scenarios. And so for now, I'm just saying don't bother with a scenario. In the long run, like in production, I think you'll always have a scenario. So we may make our tests need that. They shouldn't, if the real situation is going to need it, then they should have it. But for now, they don't. And so we haven't pushed that out. I don't know. We'll see. It's coming along. I kind of know a vision of what I want, and I'm hoping this path will get us there. All right, and let's do a quick little demo. The big thing, functionality-wise, there's not a lot different. The big thing we did was add people. So I've got Jay and Liza. I'm sorry, we added the ability to delete people. I'm going to delete Jay, and that's all that happens. You don't see him in the list anymore. If he had an entry relying on his age, that would get a little message in here saying the person wasn't found. And I don't know. I'm not sure that's the best solution overall, but that's what it does. So amount is percent of a stream, fully working UI and everything. If we finish that next week, or whenever we finish that, we'll move on to the notion of variables. And so I think I want to make the notion of variable is that you can create scenarios based on, what if I retire at 62 or 67 or that kind of thing? What if I die at age 90 or I die at age 60? What are the consequences? Rather than include that sort of thing in the person, I'm going to reference it as a kind of standalone variable, and you can go down sort of like assumptions or something like that. And we'll let you use those as another way to specify a date and maybe an amount. Once those are done, the two sort of related big features I want are the ability to specify growth and inflation. So if I want to assume my portfolio is going to grow at 6% or 7%, if inflation's at 5%, then I have real growth. If it's at 10%, I'm in trouble. Okay, or maybe not in trouble, but I'm not increasing for sure. Okay, so we'll get there. That's probably not anywhere near next week or the next 2 weeks, but we'll see. All right, so we meet Monday to Thursday, 2 to 4:30 Eastern Time, or 6 to 8:30 p.m. UTC. And if you go to xp123.com/Twitch, you get the live sessions. xp123.com/YouTube, you get the old sessions, time delayed by a week or two and lightly edited. But this coming week, I will only be here, most likely will only be here Monday. I have family coming in town, and I think I'm going to be able to work on Monday and probably not the rest of the week. But if you're really following closely, check in. But all right. Thanks for watching, and hope you can join us this week or some other. Thanks. Bye-bye.